Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing yet another episode of Pokemon Chronicles, this episode being Journey to the Starting Line, focusing on Professor Oak at his lab. And that's the first place we see, as the first thing we see is Bulbasaur at Professor Oak's lab, with the sun shining bright down on him, as he saw Heracross suck sap from a nearby tree, and he saw Bayleaf sleep. And he then smiles immensely, seeing the Hoppips, Skiplooms, and Jumpluff float in the sky, enjoying each other's company. Meanwhile, at another part of the Pokemon habitats at Oak's lab, Phanpy was desperately trying to get a hold on some apples in a tree, and Kingler, beside it, had approached to see what Phanpy was doing. Kingler soon became distracted, though, as it saw some Poliwhirl and Poliwrath swimming about in a nearby pond, below some Marill who were dancing. Kingler, seeing the Marill's tails move around so rapidly when they danced, caused Kingler to become dizzy, and was about to fall over because of the dizziness, so he tried to save himself with his claw, but since he couldn't really see what the fuck he was doing, since he was so dizzy, he accidentally pinched Phanpy's tail with his claw, causing Phanpy, who was startled by this, to start crying and fall down from the tree, falling down a hill in the process as it went into its rollout position, using rollout. Phanpy eventually rolled down past Bulbasaur, alerting him, leading Bulbasaur to run after Phanpy in an attempt to stop it, although Bulbasaur couldn't catch up before Phanpy came upon a dancing Totodile, and since it couldn't stop, it rammed Totodile straight into the air. Although Totodile actually enjoyed being up in the air, as it took the opportunity to do some aerial dancing before landing very loudly, causing some dust to appear, and Totodile soon realized that it had landed right next to Ash's Snorlax, who was sleeping, although Totodile got scared, as it falling next to Snorlax had disturbed its sleep a little bit, causing it to roll over in its sleep, nearly crushing Totodile. But at the last second, Bulbasaur had arrived near Totodile, having seen him fall on the ground, and pulled Totodile away from Snorlax with its Vine Whip. Although the danger wasn't quite over, even though it was over for Bulbasaur and Totodile, as Snorlax ended up rolling over, but rolled down a hill, which Cyndaquil noticed when it was happily sniffing some flowers. Of course, seeing Snorlax coming towards it, due to how fucking big and fat Snorlax was, made Cyndaquil terrified that it would be crushed, as it tried to run away. Cyndaquil was running so fast, not paying attention to where it was going, because it couldn't fucking focus on that, so it ended up running off a cliff, landing hard below the cliff. Snorlax, not being able to stop itself from rolling down the hill, fell off as well, creating an impact so big that Cyndaquil went flying into the air. Cyndaquil was so shocked by this, as it thought that it had escaped Snorlax, that it released a random flamethrower that accidentally hits the Tauros, burning them, waking them up, and startling them. So they began to stampede, as Bulbasaur heard this stampede, and rushed to the edge of the hill that Cyndaquil and Snorlax had fallen off of, to see the Tauros stampeding, worried as fuck. Meanwhile, inside the lab, Professor Oak was unaware of the stampede that was going on outside, being too busy working on his computer, doing some research and shit, when Tracy walked in, carrying a stack of books that he was putting in Professor Oak's office. As Tracy did this, placing the books on a shelf, he asked Oak how his research and shit was doing, leading Oak to admit that his research was going fine, although Tracy soon realized, as he decided to place one of the books on the coffee table in Oak's lab, where he had left Oak's lunch for the day, that Oak hadn't touched his lunch or his breakfast at all. The fucking sandwiches, eggs, veggies, and coffee were still there, and demanded that Oak take a break. Oak refused, but Tracy stated his concern for Oak's health, so Oak gave in and began to eat, although he soon realized that he was so hungry that he just started gulping everything down, leading Tracy to state that he should slow down. Tracy also reminds Oak that he still had to do a checkup on the 3 starter Pokemon, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Charmander, that he was planning to have the new trainer that was coming today pick up. Yeah, that's right, there was a trainer who was just starting out on their journey today, coming to Oak's lab to get a starter. Also, Tracy reminded Oak of what the healthcare checkup that he needed to do entailed, and also of the fact that the new trainer that was coming was the mayor of Pallet Town's son. Oak was surprised, as he had forgotten that the trainer was coming today, but he didn't worry, as he said that he would get to the Pokemon checkup eventually, but then Tracy added that the mayor's son was supposed to be at the lab any minute, so Oak was caught off guard, and hurriedly went to go do a checkup on the starter Pokemon, but Tracy stopped him, saying that Oak would have to do the checkup when the trainer was already there, as the doorbell then rang, and Tracy assumed that it must have been the mayor's son. So Tracy went to go answer the door, but not before giving Oak a profile on a whole bunch of information regarding the mayor's son, so that Oak could potentially see what he was like and could make a suggestion on which starter he should choose. Oak reads the information regarding the mayor's son, finding out his name was actually Gilbert, and Oak was impressed by all of the things on this profile regarding the mayor's son, as it listed a lot of cool achievements that he had, particularly related to games that he had played, like, sports and just like physical activities throughout Pallet Town. Anyways, Tracy had left Oak's office to go answer the door, and he ran there as fast as he could, only increasing his speed when he heard the doorbell ring again, cursing to himself how the kid was fucking impatient, dude. As Tracy was running to the doorbell, Muck then appeared and began to follow Tracy. When Tracy opened the door, he found out that the person that was super impatient wasn't actually the kid Gilbert, but actually Ash's mom and Mr. Mime, who had come with some food in a picnic basket to give Professor Oak a snack. Just as Tracy greeted Ash's mom and Mr. Mime, Muck had arrived and smothered Tracy just like he did Oak. Ash's mom and Mr. Mime backed away a bit, startled by Muck, as Tracy tried to crawl out from under Muck and made a joke about how fucking gross Muck was. Ash's mom then asked if Tracy needed a hand, seeing how tightly Muck was smothering him, as he was then sucked back under Muck, and asked if Tracy could hear her from underneath Muck. Tracy indicated that he could, as he mumbled something, but Ash's mom couldn't make this out, so she asked him to repeat what he said, allowing Tracy to eventually crawl his way out from under Muck again, and confirm that he was okay, and that's what he had said earlier, stating that he was used to Muck smothering him and Oak by now. Thankfully, Tracy was then able to get out of Muck, and we then see Professor Oak, who was actually giving Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle their checkups, since he had saw that Gilbert hadn't arrived yet. As he was doing this, Tracy escorted Ash's mom and Mr. Mime into Oak's office, and Oak greeted all three of them, admitting that he was just finishing giving Squirtle, Bulbasaur, and Charmander their checkups, making Tracy impressed that Oak finally decided to do this. As he asked what the three starters' condition even was, leading Oak to admit that the three Pokemon were in good shape. Ash's mom then unpacked the food that she had brought Oak from the picnic basket, being some edible herbs, and asked what Oak was doing, giving these Pokemon checkups, leading Oak to reveal how the mayor's son was coming to pick up a Pokemon soon. Just then, the ground started to shake. The three starter Pokemon, along with Oak, Ash's mom, Tracy, and Mr. Mime, all looked concerned as they wondered what the fuck the sound was when a large section of the wall crashed, caving in, and the Tauros herd stampeded through the entire office, knocking everything and everyone over. Yeah, that's right, the Tauros were the source of the sound. The Tauros then end up creating a whole new hole in the wall at the other side of the office as they go through that one back outside. As Oak wondered what could have caused the stampede, Bulbasaur, who had went down the hill to chase after the Tauros, made it inside, coming in the hole that the Tauros had created, the first one. Bulbasaur had wanted to warn Oak about the stampeding Tauros, though he unfortunately saw that he was too late, as the Tauros were gone. Oak then went up to the hole that the Tauros had exited through to see if he could see where they were outside, only to see that the three starter Pokemon, which were scared by the Tauros, were by the hole and were leaving the lab through the hole. They were basically so scared that the Tauros were going to end up circling back to the lab that they had left the lab. Oak called for the three starter Pokemon to come back, but they had already left. Just then, as Oak freaked out, wanting to go chase after the three starter Pokemon, he was startled by a young boy's voice, and he turned around to see that Gilbert had arrived. Having walked in through the hole, and he questioned how the hole had even came to be in the lab in the first place, missing the Tauros stampede. Gilbert was about to ask whether his starter Pokemon was ready for him or not, although before he could, he was interrupted by Ash's mom, who recognized him as a little kid who used to hang around Ash a little bit back when Ash was in Pallet Town, and she asked if Gilbert remembered her as Ash's mom, but Gilbert just shrugged her off and sat in Oak's computer chair. Seeing how energetic Gilbert was, going to plop his ass down in the chair, Professor Oak commented how Gilbert was likely very excited to get his first Pokemon, and Gilbert admitted that he couldn't wait, and asked what Pokemon Oak had available, stating that he really wanted a Torchic so it could evolve into a very strong Blaziken. Although Oak clarified to Gilbert that he didn't have Torchic available, leading Gilbert to interrupt in mid-sentence and say that Mudkip or Trico would also suffice. Tracy was confused, as he figured that any kid would know the main starters that professors gave out, and should know that Professor Oak gave out Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. Tracy then noticed that Gilbert did in fact know that Professor Oak tended to give out Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle, though he hoped that Oak had Trico, Mudkip, and Torchic as well, stating his belief that the newly discovered Hoenn Pokemon were much better than the older Kanto Pokemon. Also adding that he especially didn't want Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle because he thought they were lame, since all the trainers in Pallet Town started off with one of them. Ash's Bulbasaur was pissed off at Gilbert due to it getting upset on behalf of all other Bulbasaurs in the world for Gilbert insulting them. Gilbert didn't even notice Bulbasaur's angry glare, though, as he simply just went on and on about how he really wanted a Blaziken because of how strong it was, though clarified that if Torchic, Mudkip, or Trico really weren't options, then he at least wanted a Vigoroth, since he had watched some TV programs with trainers in Hoenn, and he had saw a trainer use a Vigoroth, and he wouldn't mind having one. Ash's mom thought Gilbert's adamance towards not getting Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle was kind of cute, but Tracy didn't think so. He was getting angry with Gilbert's attitude, as he tried to explain to Gilbert that professors didn't just have any fucking Pokemon to give out, they had set ones. Gilbert tried to rebut, but Tracy simply continued and angrily yelled that it shouldn't even matter to Gilbert that much who his starter was, since all Pokemon were good, so Gilbert should just suck it up and take Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle. Oak was kind of shocked to see Tracy angrily yell, and tried to talk to Gilbert in a more calm way, though still said the same point as Tracy did, stating that Gilbert would have to choose either Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle, because that's all that he had, although he admitted that he didn't even have those three right now, because they had run away. Which also, of course, meant that Gilbert couldn't choose his starter yet. Gilbert laughed at this, thinking Oak must have been kind of dumb to have his three starter Pokemon run away, although he thought that he could still get a starter, as he remembered a trainer getting a Pikachu before, and stated that even though he would prefer to have a Hoenn Pokemon, he would settle for Pikachu, since he had heard that the trainer who set off with a Pikachu had been pretty successful. Ash's mom instantly knew that Gilbert must have been talking about Ash, since he was the only trainer that had gotten a Pikachu from Oak, and Ash's mom and Oak explained this, assuring Gilbert that Ash was the only trainer to get a Pikachu, with Ash's mom adding that Ash only got Pikachu due to special circumstances. Gilbert asked what these circumstances were, stating that he was special as well, so he should get a Pikachu. And Ash's mom didn't tell Gilbert, as she thought that maybe Gilbert would have looked up to Ash, since he obviously knew that he was doing good and had heard about him, so he must have cared about Ash somewhat. So Ash's mom didn't want to ruin Gilbert's thought of Ash by saying that he had overslept, as that might not impress him, obviously. Gilbert was annoyed by Ash's mom not telling him what made the circumstances so special, and remained adamant that he should get a Pikachu, wanting to evolve it into a Raichu, as he admitted that Raichu was even cooler than the Hoenn starters, although he then realized that he could just have Oak give him a Raichu right away, still not grasping the concept that Oak didn't have a whole bunch of Pokemon available. Gilbert then went on and on about how he wanted Raichu now, stating that he could have a starter that was already super powerful without him having to raise it. Tracy got extremely pissed off at this shit, as he scolded Gilbert, for not wanting to actually raise his Pokemon and just start out with strong ones, stating that raising Pokemon was the whole point of becoming a trainer in the first place. Oak was embarrassed by Tracy yelling again, and told him to calm down, stopping him from talking as he interrupted. Although he only echoed what Tracy had said in a calmer form, once again, stating that Pokemon didn't have to evolve to be super strong. Although Oak admitted that they had bigger priorities than just talking about evolving a starter right now, as he reassured Gilbert that the only options he had were Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle, and they were all missing, so if Gilbert actually wanted to start a Pokemon, then the 3 missing ones would have to be found. Also warning that if the Pokemon were not found, since they were so young, something bad could happen to them out on their own. So, with that, Professor Oak, Tracy, Ash's mom, and Gilbert set off to go find the 3 starter Pokemon, stopping in front of an old woman's shop, which she was currently tending to, sweeping and putting shit on shelves and shit like that. So she noticed when Oak, Tracy, Gilbert, and Ash's mom, along with Mr. Mime, came by and proceeded to plan how they were going to find the 3 Pokemon, as they knew they had to start outside, so they just went out by this random shop. The old woman also saw that Gilbert was out of breath, as he wasn't used to running like Oak, Tracy, and Ash's mom had, as they were fucking rushing hard to be able to try and find the Pokemon. So, anyways, Gilbert, Oak, Tracy, and Ash's mom came up with a plan, mostly formulated by Oak, which involved Oak and Gilbert going to search by the nearby Pallet Town mountains, whereas Ash's mom and Tracy would go search by the nearby river. Although, before Tracy left, Oak gave Tracy the 3 starter Pokemon's Pokeballs and instructed him to recall the Pokemon to them if he found them, to make sure they wouldn't run farther. So, with that, Tracy, Ash's mom, and Mr. Mime run towards the river, with Professor Oak turning to Gilbert and reminding him that it was time for the 2 of them to search by the mountains, although he saw that Gilbert was still out of breath from all the running, and asked him how he planned to travel across the world on a Pokemon journey when a short run from his lab to a shop tired him out. Gilbert finally managed to get back up, when suddenly the old woman who was tending to a shop called over to Oak, holding in her hand a new issue of a Pokemon magazine known as Pokemon Monthly, trying to convince him to buy one by buttering him up and stating that she actually saw that Oak had appeared in this latest issue. Particularly, a whole bunch of his hypotheses were inside the issue apparently, and she excitedly asked Oak if any of these were true. Oak told the lady everything that was confirmed true that he could remember, although he admitted that he didn't have time to buy an issue right now, and asked her to hold an issue for him, stating that right now he and Gilbert had to find 3 starter Pokemon that had ran off, and he then explained the whole situation of what had happened to the old lady. Though, asked the old lady not to tell anyone about this, since he didn't want his reputation to be ruined. He feared that everyone in Pallet Town may think less of him because he had managed to lose his starter Pokemon. Before the old lady could even answer, Oak and Gilbert ran off into the mountains to go look for the Pokemon. The old lady was mad that Oak had left without getting an issue of the monthly Pokemon magazine. However, she calmed down pretty quick after she remembered that Oak had promised to come back to her shop and pick up a copy of the Pokemon Monthly so long as she saved it for him. And she realized that the quicker the 3 Pokemon could be found, the quicker Oak would return to her store. So she decided to go against what Oak had wanted, and proceeded to go into her store, determined to tell the entire Pallet Town of Oak's splendor and the fact that the Pokemon needed to be located. Hoping that all of Pallet Town combined would be enough to locate the 3 Pokemon, and hoping that, due to her help, Oak would feel more inclined to buy even more from her store. Meanwhile, back with Oak and Gilbert as they made their way up the mountains. First, having to make their way up a small hill, Gilbert began to complain, leading Oak to question why Gilbert was so unfit with both running and climbing, and will ask why he complained so much, with Gilbert remarking that if Oak would have just had Hoenn Pokemon, then this whole situation wouldn't have happened, as Gilbert just could have taken the Hoenn Pokemon and moved the fuck on, instead of having to go and get tired looking for Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. The subject of Gilbert and Oak's conversation then turned to the woman who owned the shop, with Gilbert confident that the old lady would spill the beans to the rest of the town, but the professor expressed hope that the old lady wouldn't, since he had agreed to buy her issue of Pokemon Monthly. Gilbert's fears turned out to be completely justified, though, as the old lady started broadcasting from her shop through a loudspeaker that was connected to the whole town. Basically, she had a way to talk through a microphone in her shop through a loudspeaker, and she first revealed her name as Masai, and informed the residents of Pallet Town that Oak was in dire need of help finding his 3 missing starter Pokemon, and suggested that everyone should start looking. And she put on some super high-octave, intense music to get everyone encouraged. She worried, though, that even this hype music wouldn't even get all the townsfolk encouraged, so she decided to also offer a reward for whoever would find the Pokemon first, or if anyone at least had any information on their whereabouts, or where they could have gone off to. Although she didn't specify what this award was. Meanwhile, as we fade out of the main area of Pallet Town, with the loudspeakers still blaring, and all the people in houses hearing the loudspeaker, we see Tracy, Ash's mom, and Mr. Mime searching the huge river nearby for the starter Pokemon, and eventually Mr. Mime spotted Charmander, after only a few minutes. As for what Charmander was doing, it was curious about a Magikarp by the huge river, trying to prod at its fin that was just above the surface, while the rest of its body was below the surface of the water. Upon seeing this, Tracy and Ash's mom and Mr. Mime got extremely concerned, knowing that if Charmander fell in the water, then its flame would go out, and it would be so injured that it could die, or not ever be able to battle. So Tracy, Ash's mom, and Mr. Mime yelled for Charmander to stop trying to reach the Magikarp, but Charmander continued to reach for the Magikarp as the Magikarp began to swim away, causing Charmander to fall in the water on top of it. And since it obviously couldn't swim, Charmander began to flail around in the water, about to die, making Tracy panic immensely as he jumped into the river to go save Charmander. And fortunately, Tracy managed to swim rapidly to Charmander and grab a hold of him, pulling him up in his hands before his tail got submerged by the water, so he should be okay. Ash's mom and Mr. Mime began to panic that Tracy may drown while swimming back, and sure enough, as Tracy was swimming back, since he had Charmander in his arms, he couldn't swim to the best of his ability, so he ended up sinking below the surface, almost bringing Charmander in with him as well. But at the last second, though, before Charmander went underwater, Ash's mom told her Mr. Mime to use Psychic. And Mr. Mime obliged, using Psychic to lift Tracy and Charmander back to the riverbank safely. Tracy then checks on Charmander to make sure it was okay after being in the water, and thankfully, he realized that it was not really even passed out, just sleeping, tired from its long day of running that it had so far. So he happily recalled it to its Pokeball so it could get a little bit of sleep, and remarked that that was one Pokemon down, so there was 2 more to go. Happy that Charmander was alright. Meanwhile, as for Oak and Gilbert, they had now made it to the actual mountain, and were searching it, and soon enough, Ash's Bulbasaur came up to them, having followed them from Oak's lab, wanting to help Oak search, feeling bad for not warning him about the Tauros in time. Eventually, Oak and Gilbert made it to a small ledge above a large ravine on the mountain, which terrified Gilbert, exclaiming to Oak how he could fall off at any second, since the fall was extremely close by. He literally couldn't even walk like 2 feet to his right without falling. Oak and Ash's Bulbasaur were unfazed by this, though, simply continuing onwards, with Professor Oak assuring Gilbert that there was plenty of room and he wouldn't fall, advising that he simply just not look down or to his right, and all his fears would go away, also stating that Gilbert would face scarier and higher places, as well as just scarier things in general, while on his Pokemon journey. So he suggested that Gilbert get over his fear. Gilbert didn't enjoy being lectured by Oak, so he simply said that he wasn't afraid, as he pushed himself against the farthest left of the ledge, determined not to fall off. However, a small part of the ledge then breaks off, and this freaks out Gilbert once again, as he changes his mind, admitting that he was afraid. This leads Oak to state that if the ledge was too much for him, then he could just wait for Oak to find the Pokemon himself, and go back to the lab. Gilbert rebutted, however, that he shouldn't have to go back to the lab just because he didn't have a Pokemon right now, stating that if Oak hadn't lost the Pokemon and Gilbert was actually able to get one, then he wouldn't be scared at all of the cliff, since his Pokemon could help him. And added that if he had a Pokemon that could help him, he could also conquer the more difficult things that Oak said that he would encounter when he became a trainer, specifying that his want for his Pokemon to potentially sacrifice themselves to protect him was why he didn't want to start out with a weak Pokemon. Oak questioned Gilbert if he thought he had the right attitude, with Gilbert stating that he definitely thought that he did. He thought that Pokemon were supposed to protect you. Oak informs Gilbert that he had the wrong fucking attitude, saying that you didn't just use Pokemon as tools to protect you, you treated them as your friends as well, and suggested that if Gilbert couldn't grasp this, then he should actually not even go back to the lab, just go right back the fuck home and quit being a Pokemon trainer. Gilbert realized that he and Oak clearly didn't share the same ideals, so he decided to oblige and go home, not wanting to bother with helping Oak find the Pokemon anymore, thinking that he could maybe just become a trainer by getting a starter from someone else or some shit. But as he made his way back down the mountain, trying to get back to his house, but immediately after he left Oak and Bulbasaur, he heard none other than what sounded like a Squirtle. Gilbert then looked up to see Squirtle high above him, hanging desperately from a tree branch that was very close to the ledge they were on. Gilbert then became worried, wondering what he could do to save the Squirtle, as he went up to Oak and Bulbasaur to inform them of the situation, but then he remembered that he had quit talking to Oak and Bulbasaur, finding Oak useless, and reminded himself of his philosophy of Pokemon protecting humans, not the other way around. So therefore, he decided that he didn't need to help Squirtle at all, and continued his trek back home. Although it seemed as though Professor Oak's talking was working on Gilbert, as he did hesitate to leave the Squirtle, so maybe he was slowly realizing that he did actually care for Pokemon after all. Just then, as Gilbert was walking back, he accidentally stepped on a rock connected to the ledge, breaking it and causing a piece of the ledge that Gilbert was walking on to fall, therefore causing Gilbert to fall as well. Just before Gilbert would have died, going down to the bottom of the ravine, wherever that was, at the last second, Bulbasaur used its Vine Whip to grab Gilbert and pull him back up to safety. Upon doing this, Gilbert gratefully stared at his savior Bulbasaur, and admitting that he had a lot more respect for this Bulbasaur now than the other Kanto starters, since it had saved him. Things weren't better for long, though, as the Squirtle couldn't hang on to the weakening tree branch anymore, as it suddenly let go and began to fall down the ravine as well. But Oak thankfully caught it just before it flew down past him. The Squirtle then retreated into its shell, as Oak began to shake, having reached over the cliff too far to grab Squirtle, as now he was losing his balance. He tried his best to keep his balance, but he ended up falling off of the ledge as well, although Bulbasaur, having put Gilbert back onto the ledge by now, was able to use his vines to grab Oak this time and pull him back up to safety. After the traumatic ordeal of both Oak and Gilbert almost falling off the mountain, Oak and Gilbert eventually made it down the mountain to a field and decided to rest there, with Oak placing Squirtle down on the grass as it was still in its shell. And Oak and Gilbert watched the shell intensely as Bulbasaur tried to soothe the Squirtle by rubbing it with its vines, since Squirtle was now too terrified to come out of its shell. Gilbert then questioned Oak why they didn't just put Squirtle inside of its Pokeball, since it would probably come out of its shell then, and therefore Oak and Gilbert, along with Bulbasaur, wouldn't have to waste their goddamn time waiting for Squirtle to come out of its shell. Although Bulbasaur growled angrily at Gilbert before continuing to soothe Squirtle, insinuating that Gilbert must have got something truly wrong, which was related to him asking if they could just put Squirtle back into its Pokeball. Oak explained that if they just put Squirtle back in its Pokeball, even if it popped out of its shell, it would still be afraid of the outside world because of its traumatic experience of both ending up in a tree and almost falling off the cliff. So, explained that Bulbasaur was trying to make Squirtle feel more comfortable so that it wouldn't be scared of the outside world anymore. Gilbert questioned why Squirtle would be scared of the entire outside world just because it had almost fallen off of one ledge, leading Oak to remind Gilbert that the Squirtle had spent his entire life pretty much inside of Oak's lab, so it hadn't really gotten to see the rest of the outside world for itself to prove that it was alright. Gilbert was confused at Pokemon having that complex of thoughts, admitting to Oak that he really just thought that Pokemon were basically attacking machines and didn't have a whole bunch of thought on their own. Oak saw that Gilbert had a lot to know about the Pokemon world, so he proceeded to explain a whole bunch of shit to him in an exposition dump, explaining that Pokemon had feelings just like humans, and trainers needed to be able to identify their Pokemon's feelings, admitting that a lot of them were as complex, if not more complex, than human emotions, and added that it was up to trainers to treat all their Pokemon with kindness and affection. That way, the trainer will share a friendship with their Pokemon that can never be broken. Oak then brings up Ash, and mentions that he had his doubts about him originally, but Ash proved to be one of the best trainers he had ever come across because of his affection for his Pokemon, particularly his Pikachu, making Gilbert realize that the trainer that Oak was talking about was in fact the trainer that was super good with his Pikachu that he had heard about. Gilbert then realized that Pokemon did have complex feelings as well, as he saw Bulbasaur going through the trouble to try and awaken the Squirtle by making some funny images of other Pokemon with its vines, indicating that it really wanted the Squirtle to wake up and that Pokemon could make friends with each other. Gilbert also had a flashback of Bulbasaur saving him from falling down the ledge not too long ago, and because he had fully realized because of this that Pokemon did have feelings, Gilbert went up to Bulbasaur, sitting next to him, saying that he wanted to try and help Bulbasaur get Squirtle out of its shell, as he started by placing large leaves on his eyebrows and mockingly pretending he was Professor Oak. Particularly, a Professor Oak doing one of his classes. Bulbasaur was a little freaked out by Gilbert's fake transformation into Oak, and was a little offended on behalf of Oak, although Oak was offended as well, claiming that he didn't just look like a kid with leaves on his head. Gilbert simply ignored Bulbasaur and Oak, and started to make silly faces while still in his Professor Oak disguise, even though he just had two leaves in his head, and he continued to state that he was Professor Oak, which pissed Oak off even more, because he didn't want to be associated with whatever Gilbert was doing. Squirtle popped out of its shell for a few seconds to take a look at the funny faces, although Gilbert didn't see this, so he got depressed, thinking that there was no way to get Squirtle out of its shell, declaring that he gives up, when suddenly Squirtle popped out of its shell fully and happily leaped into Gilbert's arms as Gilbert happily begins to play with it, lifting Squirtle up into the air as Squirtle smiled, making Oak pleased that Gilbert finally had a bond with Squirtle, or a Pokemon in general, since he had made funny faces to it, and that had cheered Squirtle up. Anyways, with Squirtle now happy, Oak and Gilbert decided to meet back up with Tracy, Ash's mom, and Mr. Mime, and they both informed each other of their progress, with Oak and Gilbert saying that they had found Ash's Bulbasaur along the way, but had only found the Squirtle, with Tracy, Mr. Mime, and Ash's mom confirming that they'd only found the Charmander, so now only the Bulbasaur remained. Just then, the Pallet Town loudspeaker sounds as the old woman from earlier, Masai, called for Oak to come to her shop. Professor Oak was admittedly confused by this, as upon hearing the loudspeaker, he thought that he would be going to the Pallet Town station, where the speakers were known to be, but he went to Masai's store anyways, and soon found out that Masai's store had a way to connect to the town's loudspeakers. Once at the store, Oak assured Masai that he would buy the Pokemon magazine when he had a fucking minute, but Masai revealed something different, being that she had of course told all of Pallet Town about the missing starters. Oak was obviously pissed off by this, as he told her not to, though he had cheered up as he found out that Masai doing this had actually proved useful, as now the Bulbasaur that had got away had many people spot it. And Masai then went into detail about all these sightings, as she read through some sheets of paper that had all the sightings written on it, and she told Oak all of them, stating that one dude saw it in his garden and tried to catch it with a bug net to stop it from sniffing his flowers, but Bulbasaur got away in time. Then there was another sighting of Bulbasaur pretending to be a Pokemon doll in a house full of other Pokemon dolls, including one of a Snorlax, one of another Bulbasaur, one of a Dugtrio, one of a Geodude, one of a Pidgey, one of a Poliwhirl, and one of a Bayleaf, as well as pictures of Pichu. Masai then mentioned the most recent sighting being her own store, stating that she had spotted Bulbasaur inside her store's vegetable stand, but admitted that even when it was there, she wasn't able to catch it. Tracy then questions where Bulbasaur was at this very moment, but Masai reveals that there hadn't been any more reports for a while, so Bulbasaur hadn't been spotted in quite a while. But suddenly, the phone then rings, and she rushed to answer it, thinking that it may have been a report, and sure enough, it was. As the person on the other end of the phone had claimed that they had seen some Mankey in a forest nearby, and apparently Bulbasaur was with these Mankey, and also being chased by the Mankey. Masai thanked the caller and hung up and informed Oak of the situation, leaving Oak to thank her for the information and admit that Oak knew where the Mankey hang out in the forest, since he had obviously been there before, because being the professor, he obviously explored all the regions of Pallet Town, including his forest. So Oak led Tracy, Ash's mom, and Mr. Mime into the forest, along with Gilbert, as well as Ash's Bulbasaur, who was still eager to help. Upon arriving into the forest, Oak, Tracy, Gilbert, Ash's mom, Mr. Mime, and Bulbasaur found all the Mankey who had actually evolved into Primate, and noticed that half of them were fighting each other, which kind of scared Gilbert, since the Primate looked scary when they were fighting. But Oak assured Gilbert that he really had no reason to be scared of the Primate, since their natural way was to be angry and fight each other. That's kind of how they played with each other. Everyone then noticed that the Primate had surrounded the tree above them, and this was coincidentally the tree that the Bulbasaur was in. Yeah, that's right, he was there, and he was terrified in the tree of what the Primate could potentially do to him if its hiding spot in the tree had been uncovered, while Ash's mom was concerned that Bulbasaur could fall off the tree and get really hurt. Oak debated what they should do to save the Bulbasaur, when Gilbert suggests that Ash's Bulbasaur could simply use its Vine Whip to pull the other Bulbasaur out of the tree and save it, and then Ash's Bulbasaur could defeat all the Primate, believing that Ash's Bulbasaur had the capability to, since it was already at a high level, and the Vine Whip was also pretty strong. Although Tracy knocked some sense into Gilbert, reminding him that even though Bulbasaur was strong, there were still too many Primate for him to handle. And he also said that if Bulbasaur used Vine Whip at all, then the Primate would end up climbing up those vines to reach Bulbasaur faster than the vines could actually reach Bulbasaur. And he then told Gilbert to quiet down, unless he had an actual good suggestion. Oak then gets the idea to come out from where they were all watching the Primate and try and talk to the Primate calmly, assuring them that he was just at the tree to get Bulbasaur. He meant them no harm, but Oak's attempts to calm down the Primate only end up making them more angry. Oak tries to reason with the Primate some more, but fails. Thankfully, though, Ash's mom saw that at least Oak was distracting the Primate, so this allowed her to order Mr. Mime to use Psychic. And this Psychic lifts Bulbasaur off of the tree, but while Mr. Mime was still working on bringing Bulbasaur towards him and Ash's mom, Gilbert, who was immensely happy to see that Bulbasaur was being saved, accidentally sneezed, messing up Mr. Mime's concentration, causing him to lose focus, which also caused the Psychic to fail, and Bulbasaur to therefore be dropped on the ground, right on top of the leader Primate's head. The Primate were all immensely enraged by this, and they started to use a powerful move, Thrash, in anger, wanting to attack both Bulbasaur and Oak. But Bulbasaur and Oak end up running back into the bushes, where Tracy, Ash's mom, and Gilbert were, and Oak states that hiding would be useless, since the Primate weren't going to stop chasing them until they caught them. So, with that, everyone runs away through the forest. Though, of course, the angry Primate gave chase all throughout the forest, with some of them eventually taking to the trees to jump across the trees to catch up faster. Just then, Oak, Tracy, Ash's mom, Mr. Mime, Gilbert, and Ash's Bulbasaur came across a crossroads, and Oak suggested that they split up to divert the Primate, but Tracy admitted that this wasn't a good idea, and suggested that they all stick together and go down the left path. So, Oak agreed with this eventually, not having much time to argue, as everyone went to the left path. But suddenly, a Primate caught up and tackled Gilbert, jumping onto his back and kind of riding piggyback on him. This obviously caused Gilbert to freak out, and he ran without paying attention to where he was going, and he ended up going down the right path instead of the left path. Eventually, Gilbert managed to get that one Primate off him, but this angered the Primate even more, as it called out for all its friends, and therefore, all of the Primate began chasing after only Gilbert. And as Gilbert ran, he almost stepped on Oak's Bulbasaur, which made him realize that Oak's Bulbasaur had ended up going along with him. Meanwhile, since Oak, Tracy, Ash's mom, and Mr. Mime weren't being chased anymore, they were able to look around and notice that Gilbert and Oak's Bulbasaur were missing, so they began to look for them. Anyways, as Gilbert and Oak's Bulbasaur ran, they eventually came upon the edge of a cliff. This obviously terrified Gilbert, as the cliff was too big to jump down, and when he turned around, he saw that the Primate had now caught up to him, and would attack him and Bulbasaur at any second, which terrified Bulbasaur, as Bulbasaur hid behind Gilbert. Gilbert then got a determined look on his face, building up confidence, knowing that he would have to prepare himself to try and fight the Primate by himself, even though that was practically impossible. Remarking to Bulbasaur that he would stop being a weakling, and he would fight these Primate on his own, although this was a very stupid move, as Gilbert had no chance against all the Primate, let's be real. Though, thankfully, right as the Primate jumped towards Gilbert, they ended up being knocked away by Ash's Bulbasaur's Vine Whip, because Ash's Bulbasaur had followed Gilbert and the Bulbasaur as well. Although all the Primeape were only momentarily weakened by the Vine Whip, Bulbasaur took the chance to stand in front of Gilbert while all the Primeape were getting back up, and Bulbasaur then picked up Gilbert and the other Bulbasaur with its Vine Whip, and uses its Vine Whip to lift them safely across the cliff to another cliff on the other side, which was too far to jump towards. Once across the cliff to the other cliff, Gilbert yelled at Ash's Bulbasaur, asking how it planned to save itself, as all the Primeapes had gotten back up and cornered Bulbasaur now, but Bulbasaur just ignored him, trying to focus as the Primeape all jumped at Ash's Bulbasaur to attack it. Gilbert tried to yell out to warn it, but Bulbasaur didn't need the warning, as it suddenly soaked in light from the sun and released a super large solar beam at all the Primeape, causing a flash of light followed by an explosion, which utterly knocked out every single one of the Primeape for a second, as Bulbasaur roared, trying to scare off the injured Primeape, and this worked, as the injured Primeape ran off scared. Gilbert was immensely impressed and shocked at Ash's Bulbasaur's power, as he picked up the Bulbasaur that was on the other cliff with him, and began to hug it, showing both of their happiness that the Primeape were dealt with. Eventually, Tracy, Ash's mom, Mr. Mime, and Oak came to the other cliff and noticed Gilbert and the Bulbasaur, and told them to meet them at Oak's lab, and Gilbert did so, going back with Oak's Bulbasaur, who now stood beside him. Gilbert then revealed that he was ready to finally set off on his Pokemon journey because he had picked his starter Pokemon, being Oak's Bulbasaur, thinking that he could eventually raise it up into a Bulbasaur that was just as strong as Ash's. And he knew that this Bulbasaur had the potential for sure. Oak complimented Gilbert on being able to go on his journey, having gained courage and broken out of his shell, as he affirms that Bulbasaur was a great choice for a starter, and waved with Ash's mom and Tracy as Gilbert walked away. Mr. Mime waved as well. As Gilbert walked away, Oak wished him good luck, and Bulbasaur called out to him, causing Gilbert to turn around, and he put his hand up in determination, promising Ash's Bulbasaur personally that when he came back from his journey, his Bulbasaur would be just as strong as Ash's, and thanks Ash's Bulbasaur for all its help with the Primeape. With that, Gilbert and his new Bulbasaur officially take off down the road out of Pallet Town towards their new journey. The episode then ends with Oak saying a haiku about Gilbert to wish him luck, with the haiku having themes about how a good trainer would catch many Pokemon, but no bond was stronger than a trainer and their first partner Pokemon, and declared that throughout Gilbert and Bulbasaur's journey, they would learn from each other and grow to be strong and powerful friends. Once Oak finished his haiku, Ash's mom got a little mad, complaining that he never did a haiku for Ash when he set off on his journey. Oak tries to defend himself, and eventually the conversation just ends with a lot of laughter, as Oak settled the argument by inviting Ash's mom for dinner. Damn.